Welcome to the Writing the Other YouTube channel. This discussion on YA and middle grade families is part of a bi-monthly series of interviews and panels with authors, editors, and scholars on subjects around writing inclusive, representational, diverse fiction. It's part of our commitment to creating free resources for writers alongside our online classes and webinars, all available at writingtheother.com. This month's video is a conversation between Writing the Other teacher Tempest Bradford and fantasy and KidLit author Shveta Thakrar. Shveta, hello. Welcome to the YouTube channel of the Writing the Other. I am so glad that you agreed to come and talk to me today about this very important topic. We've been planning to talk about this for quite a while. We have actually had many conversations about this topic, and I'm really glad that we're going to be able to bring this to my students and also to people who are just like interested in writing the other, because I feel like it is an often overlooked thing in like literature for kids, young adults, whatever you want to say. So super happy to be having this conversation with you today. But before we dive into the conversation, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay. Hi, I'm Shveta Thakrar, and I write fantasy, mostly for kids, for young adults and middle graders, but I've written some adult short stories as well. And I decided actually back in 2006, when I started writing seriously, I made the decision to always write Desi or South Asian characters, because I'd grown up without ever really seeing myself in a book, especially a fantasy book. And, I've always wanted magic. So it almost seemed like I wasn't allowed to have it. So I decided I was going to help fix that by writing the stories with people like me in them.
So what the reason why we're having this conversation is that about, I want to say a year and a half ago, something like that, on Twitter, there was an author whose name I actually literally can't remember. So it's not like I'm not trying to call people out. I just really don't remember who this person was saying something like, well, the reason why you don't see parents in YA literature is because if these kids had a mom, they would be like, she can't go out and save the world. She has to do her homework. She can't be out there doing these things because she has to clean her room. And they would be super protective and hovering over them. And they'd be like, no, they can't go out of the house because my baby. And you and I had actually, even before this happened, had already had conversations about how the sort of culture that is in a lot of the YA literature that we see published in America did not match the kind of like cultural values that we grew up with. And then that hit Twitter, and we were both like, that's how and and I believe my response was, how white of you. But it's
quite white.
It's so white, but like it's not even just that. It's a particular kind of like white middle class, upper middle class, waspy attitude toward the hovering over children and saying like, oh, kids can't do things, and it just sparked like this whole conversation about how not everybody grew up in a culture in which like that sort of individualism was the primary thing. So I guess like the first thing I want to ask you is just to talk a little bit about like your reaction to that conversation and how it tied in with some of the things that you were reading in YA at the time that also sort of gave you a similar like, it's not how it would be.
Okay, and before I even answer that, while you were talking, I suddenly realized, hilariously, if you look at 80s movies, the parents are there, like, and the kids do go off and have adventures. Or even if you look at something that's faux 80s, like Stranger Things, the parents are there and the kids are still going off and doing things. And Will's mom is especially involved, but the kids are still going off and doing things. So even like this whole idea that we must protect the children is a very, like you were saying, a very reified and strange one. But yes, but to answer your actual question, I mean, you and I, coming from families of people of color, know that our parents, for better or for worse, and aunties and uncles and grandparents, again, for better or for worse, it depends on the family and the relationship, but they are very much involved in your life. And even though I didn't grow up with my family around that much, my parents were still, my extended family, my parents were still, very much involved in what happened to me. And also just, like you said, this idea of the individual will above all is not a thing. Which isn't to say that we're not allowed to, have our own desires, but it's not something that you can just remove from the family. And you do have to take your parents and other people's thoughts into account when when you act. And of course people will be rebellious or whatever, but it's just very interesting because I haven't seen that so much in KidLit. There just seems to be this idea for the most part that the parents, and when I say parents, I'm speaking for all family, adult family, all authority figures, that they just need to be cut out of the picture because otherwise you can't have a story. And I don't think that is true. Like, to me, it's more interesting both if you have the story and have the parents involved, whether the kid needs to resist them or somehow work with them. That doesn't mean the kid can't have the agency at the end. So a lot of the, a lot of the YA books that I was reading, and even some of the middle grade, just seem to, have that I received wisdom that the parents just need to be gone. And we got to kill them off. We got to have them be neglectful or absent or just uninterested. And I just thought that's, honestly boring. And also those poor kids. And also that does not reflect everybody's experience. So in my books, the family is always involved in some way, because in my forthcoming novel Star Daughter, out from HarperTeen next August 11th, 2020, the whole story is that Sheethal has to save her dad, who she's half star and her father is mortal, and she accidentally burns him. So she has to go find her star mother. And when she goes up to the starry court, Sworglok in Hindu mythology, she ends up embroiled in the politics of her grandparents and her family constellation. I mean, family very much plays a big role in the book. And for me, that was fun because, she can still be an American teenager. She can still have a boyfriend. She can still do whatever things that we think are necessary for a teen novel while still very much having the family involved. So it can definitely be done. I've done it.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just the whole thing where there's like a lack of family outside of the nuclear unit is also just very foreign to me. Like, that is not the way that I grew up. And I understand that, like, sometimes it's not always possible to have all the aunties and the uncles and the grandparents and the cousins and stuff around because, whatever reason. But it seems as though, like, more with communities of color, that is like a staple part of the growing up thing. It's like you are in contact with those folks. And in my case, my family, like my grandparents' generation, they grew up in the South, but they left the South. They were part of one of the waves of migration up to the North, looking for better jobs, less racism, all the things. And so they all sort of came up to the same, northern state together. And then, like, first my grandmother came up, and then one of my grandmother's sisters, like, she came up later once my grandmother was established, and then she lived in the house with my grandmother, and all the families were together until she got her own house. And then everybody was always like in the same area. And this was just like, it was important, as a matter of like financial stability, like making sure you have a support system or whatever. But also, like, that was just like a core tenet of our culture, was that family is important, and you lean on your family and you stay close to your family. And even if, they don't move to the same town you do in the state, they move to a different town in the state, or they move somewhere that's like within striking distance in the car or on the bus or whatever, so that people have, they have their people somewhere nearby. And the fact that I don't see that a lot in YA, I didn't notice it super much at first, but then the more I read, the more I was like, where is everybody's aunties? why are there no aunties anywhere? And I felt like that is a thing that is, I mean, maybe it's reflective of the kind of culture that the people who wrote those books grew up in. But this is why this is a Writing the Other video, because if you are writing books that are set in a culture outside of yours, then you need to understand whether that culture has a very strong, like, community, family, communal aspect to it, and respect that and honor that and include that in the book, and then figure out ways to make your protagonist be able to, like, work within that.
Yes, whether, like I was saying, whether it's resisting or working with, or a combination, really, which is the best. But also, you were saying you wondered if that's a representative of the author's own upbringing. I actually wondered if a lot of cases it's not. It's just that's what we're taught to do in KidLit, so that's what you do. you don't have the family in there, even though it is so fun to have bigger families, have them be annoying, have them be fun, funny, have them be entertaining, have them always be shoving food down your throat because, that's how you show love. Like, I remember my grandma, if she would be like this tall to me if she were still alive today. And I remember the last time that I went to visit her, she was talking to me in Gujarati, and she'd already fed me like 3 plates of food. And I'm like, bye, I can't eat anymore. And she was like, oh no, have more. Because, that's love, like making sure you're taken care of, making sure you're nourished, and all that that it would be nice to see that reflected more in books and especially books that aren't just about the immigrant experience or whatever, that, just to see it in any book.
I definitely agree. And the other thing is, a thing that I noticed in a couple of the books that I read, and I think the biggest example was probably The Fault in Our Stars. And please don't get on Twitter and at me about your love for The Fault in Our Stars and get mad at me for saying bad things about it. Sorry. But the way that even the protagonist relates to her parents in that book is something that I was like, this is very foreign to me. For instance, early in the book, her mother has like encouraged her to go to the support group because of other kids who have cancer. She meets the boy who's like, she's super in love with through the whole book, right? She meets him for the first time. And this is the first person that she has met that she has any interest in like dealing with at all. And he's like, hey, do you want to like come take a drive with me in my car? And then, she goes out to where her mother's waiting for her to pick her up. And she's like, hey mom, I met some dude. I'm going with him in his car somewhere. And her mother's like, okay, bye, have fun. And I was like,
No, no, and no. I mean, I'm not kidding. I kind of joked about it again in Star Daughter when Sheethal's dad is like, "You're not dating until you're 35." But my parents were really like that, and and even if they, and I will say I did go on one date in high school anyway. My mom was really angry about it, but it didn't go anywhere. But what I'm trying to say is though, they would never do that because they're worried about what would happen to their kids. They would never just let them go off like that. And I think even a lot of white parents wouldn't be that cavalier about it. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not white, but that's what I suspect. And so it would, yeah. So definitely no. I mean, to us, what a weird and impossible and yeah,
right. Yeah, and
that's almost like fanfic to me.
Right, almost. And I know that in the book, because I've actually had this conversation with people about that moment, and they're like, well, but in the book he does go into, and yeah, so he does talk about how kids who get cancer often are able to get away with things that they wouldn't normally be able to get away with because like they're kids dealing with cancer, right? And so like the way that parents like worry, not necessarily worry about them, but like allow things that they wouldn't necessarily allow, it changes because they're like, my child's dying. And I do get that, but I still think that, that's
Nope.
that moment happens in a specific cultural context. And
yeah, I was going to say, if anything, that would have made my parents double down.
Right. It's like, we got to keep you up in here. Like, where are you going?
Yep.
Yeah. And just like, the way that, different cultures deal with things like that, with whether or not like you as a teenager are allowed to date or are allowed to go even on a sleepover, because I know like there are a lot of cultures in which like the parents are just like, you're gonna go sleep at someone else's house, I don't even know them, like what is this? In our characterization class, Piper J. Drake is one of our teachers, and she actually digs deep into this about like how her journey from young adulthood into adulthood in terms of like dating and relationships was very different than like the kind of journeys that she sees in YA or romance or whatever, because she comes from a traditional Thai family. And so once she became an adult, she started, doing certain things, but it wasn't until she like left the house and went to college and to do the things that she was able to start explorations that perhaps people who come from different cultures, middle American culture, whatever, would do younger, just because of, what is seen as okay or permissible is different.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, that got me thinking, I'm going to say it was last year sometime, or maybe the year before. I was at another Indian person's house apartment, and she had a friend over, and this friend had a kid. He's in high school, and nobody, and he was just very sweet, and just the type of person who wouldn't, who would do what his mom told him, who wouldn't rebel. And I was thinking, and I talked to my husband about this later. My husband's white. I was talking about this later, like, would people buy him in a book? And I don't think they would, because we've just created this idea that, of course you're going to rebel. Of course, you're not going to listen to your parents. Of course, of course. But again, that's a very modern American, in some ways, very white way of looking at things, and almost even an expected celebration of coming of age that I don't think until, well, at least not until Western values started spreading elsewhere, I don't really think was a thing elsewhere. And, and that certainly, I remember my parents used to say things like, to me and my siblings, like, what's wrong with all of you? We were basically, they didn't say perfect angels, but they're basically like, we were perfect angels growing up. We never did anything wrong, no. And so I really grew up thinking like everybody in India was just like a good little kid, and then there was us. And of course, I found out later that of course I got in trouble like everybody else. But well, I mean, that's what I mean. It's just a very different way of raising your kids, of instilling values in them. And and my mom said one time that she said, even if my mom or my dad was 80 and I was whatever age, if they came into the room and said sit down, I would sit down without question. And I thought about, again later, I thought about that and how people here would be like, oh my God, that's so terrible. But it's not, it's respect, and just all these values that we don't think of as values here. We think of as things to be cast off. And I really would like to see more of that in KidLit books, and I'm just not sure how it would be received though.
Yeah, I think that there should definitely be room for more kids who respect their parents, who honor their elders, and yet still are like, but I got to go do this thing. Because while like rebellion is cute and it's cool and all of that, I don't feel like rebellion is necessary, or like rebellion against a parental figure or the elders is necessarily like something that is needed in a YA narrative, in which like somebody has to go do a thing. Um, because again, it speaks to that thing where here in America we're like the individual is primary, but like that's not necessarily, well, at least some cultures in America feel that way, but that's not necessarily like what is the primacy in other cultures. And in cultures where community is seen as the that has primacy, it doesn't necessarily mean that like nobody ever does anything. It just means that like reasons for people doing things change or are different, and you can still be respectful of your elders while also being like, but like the world needs saving, or whatever it is that you need to do.
Or
Or
even
even
if,
just stories where you set out, you have a character who sets out to change the culture for the better. They don't necessarily have to do that in a way that is like f everything in
yes,
this
thank you.
culture.
Thank you. Because, even looking at my own life, like I come from a family of 5 generations of doctors now that my now that my cousin's kid is the first one is a doctor as well. And I'm what I call the purple sheep of the family, the artist, and my mother was never happy about this. And I think with reason, because she wanted, she was saying, I want to see you secure. And writing is not a career with any guarantees. I mean, obviously she wants me to be successful and hopes that I am. And I hope that too. But yes, being a doctor brings you certain security that, or being something like that, that being an artist doesn't. And I feel like we don't, but we here in the West, we kind of, at least maybe not on a personal level so much, but on a societal level, we just kind of sneer at that kind of thinking. And I thought, but it doesn't make sense. Like you can absolutely come to a happy medium. And I would really love to see more stories where if a kid decides, hey, that isn't, what mom and dad want for me, doesn't feel right for me, I would like them to explore it a little bit more before just casting it off. Because, your parents aren't usually saying that just to be jerks, like whatever it is they're saying. You could actually be wrong. They could actually be right. And maybe you'll end up meeting somewhere in the middle. Like it does, like you said, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but we really seem to like extremes. And that's kind of annoying.
It is, and you're right. It's like, why does it always have to be like just one thing or the other? And yeah, it's I also, when you were talking just now, I was thinking about one of my favorite movies. It's one of everybody's favorite movies, if you love things. It's Coming to America. And I remember I watched it. I mean, I loved it when it came out originally. But like I watched it just like a couple of years ago for the first time after maybe 10 years or something. And I was struck by how much stuff was in it that I didn't catch when I was a kid, that I understood like sort of on a fundamental level, because it's ostensibly, looking at my culture, African American culture. But specifically the father, Mr. McDowell, who is, he owns the, the restaurant that's looks kind of like McDonald's and whatever. And his daughter, his oldest daughter, is dating a man named Daryl. And Daryl is also the son of Black people who own a business, and they belong to like this, Black people business owning, folks in Queens. And but they all were people who like built their business up. Like they weren't handed those businesses, they built those businesses, and then like they want to pass those business on to their children, right? And so Lisa, who's the main love interest, she's dating Daryl, the son of a dude who, is the soul glow prince. And then she becomes angry with him because he's terrible and patriarchal and stupid. And so she like leaves him and she starts dating Eddie Murphy's character, Akeem. And at the time, she and her father and everybody thinks that Akeem is just some dude who is like working on the lowest tier of McDowell's. And the father like keeps trying to push Lisa into going back to Daryl, even though she has been like, I don't want to deal with him anymore. And she's like, Daddy, the only reason why you like Daryl is because he's rich.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says to her, baby, I just don't want you to have to struggle the way your mother and I did. And I was like, oh my God. Like I had forgotten like how poignant that moment was, because yeah, like even though he was being like a patriarchal douche canoe and being like, but you have to be married to a man who's rich in order to be happy. But like that desire came from that place of, he didn't want his daughter to have to go through the same thing he went through. He actually worked really hard so that actually wouldn't be the case, right? That he could put her in a social position where she could meet a man who then would like be in a social position and take care of her. And all that, of course, is like very patriarchal and annoying, but it's very true to, that mindset of our culture.
Yes, and you can see the love that was behind it. That, I don't, especially because the thing that we don't probably talk about enough outside of our communities is that it is harder for us, like I know you got this lecture too in some form or another. I got it. We all did. That you're going to have to work at least 2-3 times as hard as any white person, and you're going to have to be better than them to have half the chance they do. And it's not fair. It's really not fair, but it's true. And our parents, they had to go through a lot. My parents went through a lot, and I won't get into all the nastiness here, but there was plenty that they had to deal with. And I'm sure same in your family, just, getting through life and dealing with horrible bosses and colleagues and whatever. And they don't want that. They didn't want that for their children. And how can you blame them for that? I mean, that's the thing. I think we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we are like, I'm going to, have our stories, but I'm rebelling, and blah, 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 instead of looking at, wait, why is the parent actually saying this? Is it that they want you to be miserable? Maybe, but probably not. So what might be, what would Occam's razor say is more likely reason for this? Let's talk about it. Let's investigate. And we definitely, yeah, exactly. So to what you were saying. So.
Yeah, and it obviously it did come from a place of love, and I love the way it was handled, because then Lisa didn't say like, Daddy, I hate you and I'm never speaking to you again for your terribleness. She said, she said, I recognize that, but I'm also telling you that is not a concern that you need to be worried about. Like, but I still love you. And yeah, just it. And again, that was her way. She rebelled by, dating a guy that her father didn't like, but she was also adult. But she still respected him as her father, as her elder, as somebody who was looking out for her best interests. And there is space in YA for this. Like, this is, these are not foreign concepts. This does not only have to be in movies where Eddie Murphy plays at least half the parts in the movie.
No, it really doesn't. And that's one reason that I'm glad that the We Need Diverse Books movement really took off in 2014 and allowed more of us to have a platform to tell stories that before we wouldn't have been able to tell, because publishers wouldn't have bought them. So I'll be curious to see as more and more of us come out and write and have our books published. I'm wondering, I'd be very curious to see how much this landscape changes in that way.
Well, one last question I have for you is, because I struggled with this. As of the filming of this, I just completed the first draft of a middle grade novel that I wrote, and I'm so excited. And one of the facets of that was that, you know, my protagonist exists in a very close knit African American family and community, which did present sort of a problem when like things kicked off with the alien that shows up, because my protagonist wanted to take care of the problem, and she didn't tell her parents everything that was going on with her, but in part because she just didn't think that they would believe her. But there's always like that weird tension. It's like, okay, so if we don't have, you know, these situations where like the parents are just gone, or they're terrible abusive people, or whatever it is that like is usually done in YA or middle grade to like get the kid on their own, like how do you, you know, talk about, or how do you sort of work around that when you're like, okay, she's part of a community, she's part of a family, but she can't for some reason tell the parents about the thing that she's doing or whatever, but in a way that isn't like contrived?
I mean, I'll be curious because I haven't read this yet. I'll be curious to see how you handled it. But the first thought that came to mind for me was, I feel like the character would maybe go to another adult, like an auntie or someone an uncle they get along more with, an older cousin, somebody, and talk to them about it. And it would really be kind of a last resort that they were like, well, I'm going to strike out on my own without anybody and anything, and you know, and if yeah, just I feel like it's that just wouldn't be real. I mean, I look at families and the kids, especially when they're younger. I mean, that may change a little bit when they get older, but they like talking to their parents about stuff, you know, as long as their parents are receptive and are loving and kind. A kid wants to usually share their day and their adventures. And I feel like most kids would be like, oh my God, I found an alien, you know. And yeah, I mean, there's a risk that you know, maybe parents are going to be like, you have a wonderful imagination. The kid's like, no, I mean it. And the parents like, okay, you know, let's dial it back here. But other than that, I feel like I at least would have liked to see the kid try, I guess, you know, before just dismissing completely. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I also really am into stories where kids also have a community, and this is like, we see this in Stranger Things where like all these kids together are doing things, and I also find that super realistic. I just don't necessarily find it realistic when every single one of those kids is just like somebody that they necessarily know from school, because like, again, like there were a lot of kids when I was growing up, like my cousins were also part of my friend group, like the kids who were on my block who didn't necessarily go to school with me because of busing, were like part of my friends group, and like that's community too. And that I feel like I mean, sometimes it's because authors are a little bit afraid of creating like the cast of thousands where you have
Yeah, which
10
is a
million
fair
people.
concern. But
Yeah, but at the same time, again, in cultures where like that community thing is so important, then like that community is not just like everybody on the adult level, it's also like people on the kid level. Like kids have more than one friend, they have like groups of people who they count on, who they talk to. Some of them might be a little bit older. I know I confided a lot in my cousins who were like, you know, 5 years older than me or whatever. And so that's also super important. And just recognizing that, yeah, not, there are so many different ways of, you know, having community within your life that doesn't necessarily always have to involve like people who are completely on the outside of everything.
right.
um there's just so much like people in groups together doing things, in my
Yes, I
experience.
agree. That was going to be my other suggestion too, that eventually the kid would probably go to their friends, assuming they had them. And you know, that it wouldn't be, it's really striking me how it's like, I must, you know, venture out, strike out alone. And why though? Like, in fact, and this is me laughing at myself a little bit. So in an earlier draft of Star Daughter, our friend Holly Black had read it and gave me a critique, and she said, how come the main character's best friend, who she's known since she was very little, how come she doesn't know that she's Lil's half star? And I was like, because that's what we do in YA. And she was like, that's stupid. And you know what? She was right. That she was like, there's no way that Minna wouldn't know. And if you just have her know, that takes out a whole obstacle right there. And now you can actually have Minnow be in on the action and be her support network. And that worked so well that that's what I ended up doing in revisions. I mean, that's the thing. Why do we have this idea that it's got to be the Lone Ranger or whatever, that, and that's not how people work. That's really not how people work. In fact, we're always talking about this, right? The whole idea of pulling up yourself up by your bootstraps, which is, as we know, nonsense. But it's not even possible. You can't do anything in this world without somebody helping you, whether you know they're there helping you or not. So like, why wouldn't we just show that in stories? It actually makes it richer.
I agree. And also the idea that the community wouldn't prepare kids, or just like other people in the community for this. Like, there are many a rich story and myth about, some, like, the person's like, okay, that person is the chosen one. They have to go do the thing, but they got, this weapon from this person over here, and they learned this thing that was crucial to how they get to the end with the dragon or whatever, over here. And like, they got this advice, and like, they were wrapped up in a cloak that was made by this person. Like, the community can be there to like make it so that you have all the tools that you need as a protagonist to get the thing done, whether they come with you or they don't come with you. But you don't, it's like, it always, okay, I'm going to say the thing and everybody's going to be like, oh, she said the thing. Yes, it does take a village. Sorry. Sorry.
It does, though. That's the reason that expression exists, right?
Yes,
because
like,
life
co-opting by Hillary Clinton or not, it's actually, that's a thing. Yeah. And so if you aren't like in a place where like your community is going to help you, I feel like that actually kind of sets you up for failure, as a protagonist, if you have no people like coming together to help you out.
And also my cynical question is, why do you care at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you bothering to save these people? You have no connection to them. Right?
Yeah, I wouldn't save the world. It was full of just like nothing and no one. Like, that sounds boring. Be like, well, let that end. I don't have time for that.
But I mean, and, right, if you think about it, what makes the story stay with us? And yeah, an exciting plot is great. Like, it keeps you flipping pages. But what is it that makes you care? It's an emotional investment. And an emotional investment will be through what the character experiences. So show us the characters' relationships, right? Again, that comes back to community, that comes back to family, that comes back to friends, because you're also showing us what that person is like and by showing us what they're like with those people. And that's going to make us care about the story.
Yep. That aspect is so, so important. So yeah. So like, writers out there, like, think about what those connections are. Like, one of the best writing exercises that I've seen for characterization, it comes from the Wonder Book by Jeff Vandermeer. And the Wonder Book is like a compilation of a lot of different writing advice and such. And in the characterization section, there's a little aside.
Here it is.
Yay,
Let me grab it.
She's got it. It's there on the shelf. Yay. There's like a section that is by author Stant Latour. And he says, in order to sort of understand my characters, I need to answer certain questions about them. And one of the questions is like, what is the moment that defined their relationship to their parents? And you can use that writing exercise also. What is the moment that defined their relationship with their sister, with their, other siblings, with their aunts, uncles, whoever else? But like, knowing that moment is really, it gives you like, what is that connection that they have? What is it that has made like the way that they relate to the other people who are closest to them what it is. And that's just as important as, sort of understanding their strengths and their weaknesses and like, whatever else that you do need to understand about a character.
But those things aren't in isolation.
They're not. None of it is in isolation.
That's how we tend to think of all this. Build this character in isolation so that the character can then go off isolated into the world, right?
That's not how that works. It's a secret, but that's not how that works. Sorry. Cool. Well, do you have any other advice to give authors who are trying to work through this and to build characters and to understand other cultures so that they could understand their characters better and create more realistic goings on in their books?
My first thought would be, obviously, as Tempest has told you many times in other classes, research, research, research. But in what I would add to that is in researching, if something strikes you as weird, think about why that is, because it's not weird. It's just that's not maybe what you are used to, right? Like we're talking about family, for instance, and maybe you're like, well, I did come from a house where I had a single parent and they were busy all the time, and I was left to my own devices, and we're not denigrating that at all, but what we're saying is just consider that your experience isn't universal. So how can you look at other experiences and other cultures and try to put yourself in those shoes, or Chupples or whatever. You're never going to be able to do it perfectly because there are nuances you're going to miss, but you're going to get a lot more, I think, if you're able to make that connection by stepping out of your own way of looking at the world and trying to step into somebody else's.
Yes, that is excellent advice. And so we will end on that, but I want to thank you again for joining me. I always love talking to you. And yes,
Likewise.
everybody, run out. If you're watching this sometime in 2019, then you're going to have to wait patiently. But if you're seeing this in 2020, run out, pre-order, buy Star Daughter. I can tell you right now, it's amazing. And you can follow us both on the internets. In the description of this video, there will be links to all of our internet happenings, so you can follow along and then you can know when all of the different books and things are coming out. So thank you again.
If you're planning on having a lot for you.
Oh yeah, there's going to be so much, let me tell you. Awesome. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching our discussion. If you'd like to learn more about how to create inclusive fiction that avoids problematic pitfalls, you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram, join our community on Facebook, or take a class at writingtheother.com. Want more videos like this? Consider supporting us on Patreon. If you do, you get discounts on classes, access to exclusive Q&As, and more. Thanks again.